Welcome back to Scottish Sleep Stories, where ancient legends drift softly into the quiet of the night. Tonight's episode, we journey into the complete history of Old Valyria, from humble shepherds who discovered dragons in the depths of volcanoes, to the rise of a breathtaking empire of fire and magic, and finally to its apocalyptic destruction in a single day of unimaginable fury. But here's a question for you. Do you believe that even the greatest civilizations can fall in a single moment? Do you think true power can somehow outlast fate itself? Before we begin our descent into the smoking sea and the ashes of dragons, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as you listen tonight, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Valyria's story resonates with you the most? Now, settle in. Let the firelight once upon a time, etched into the very heart of a slumbering volcano, lay a city of breathtaking ambition and terrifying beauty. This was not a city of humble dwellings, but a testament to audacious heights, topless towers that dared to kiss the clouds perpetually pregnant with volcanic ash and the awe of those who dared to gaze upon them. Here, the sky was not the serene blue of poets' dreams, but a canvas perpetually darkened by the living storm of hundreds upon hundreds of dragons, their leathery wings eclipsing the sun.
This way, lads.
Their shadows
to the
danced
green.
across pyramids that
Watch the
defied
stragglers.
gravity,
Hold the line.
palaces that mocked the
they're
natural
following
order,
true.
structures born not
From
of chisels
fire
and
eternal
hammers,
shadows
but
rise.
of magic and will. This
By
place
the
was
power of the
Valyria,
14
and for
blessings
5
awakened
millennia she reigned
the ancient
supreme,
fury.
the most magnificent and terrifying civilization the world
Higher,
had
my
ever
dragon!
witnessed.
Let the flames
But
witness
her
our
reign
might!
was not destined to last.
Feel
In
the
a
heat
single
of the 14
apocalyptic day of
flames!
fire and
We are
unimaginable
unstoppable!
fury, Valyria was obliterated,
From the molten tears
erased
of
from
the
the
end of
map
the
as if
ancient
she had
powers.
never been.
With this blood
Tonight we
offering, let the
embark on a
volcano's
journey to
fury
trace the
course through
complete
me.
history of this impossible empire, from its humble genesis among simple shepherds to its cataclysmic demise, and perhaps in its rise and fall we might discover the lessons it holds for us, echoing across the vast expanse of centuries, long before the thunder of dragon wings filled the skies, before the gleam of Valyrian steel graced the hands of lords and conquerors. There existed a people who knew nothing of power or the intoxicating allure of conquest. They were shepherds, simple folk, content with guiding their flocks across the rugged volcanic peninsula that jutted southward into the shimmering summer sea. The land they called home was a harsh mistress, unforgiving and demanding. Dominating the landscape was a ring of 14
The
active
Valyrian shepherds are
volcanoes,
no obstacle.
affectionately, if
Their
somewhat
forces are
nervously,
scattered.
named the 14
A swift
Flames
strike
by
will
the
shatter
locals.
them.
These were
Agreed.
not gentle,
Their lands will
slumbering
be ours
giants,
by
but
week's
rather
end.
perpetually active
Peace
fire
and
peaks,
forest
constantly
breeze
belching
blowing
forth
by.
plumes of acrid smoke
mine
and occasionally
five
spewing
street
rivers of
rebel
molten
rage.
stone that painted the night
House
sky with fiery
Targaryen.
hues. The shepherds, hardy and resilient, had learned to coexist with the volatile nature of the world, finding that the volcanic soil, despite its dangers, was rich enough to sustain grazing lands for their flocks. They accepted the ever-present threat as simply a part of existence, an unavoidable reality in this fiery corner of the world. These early Valyrians, content with their pastoral lives, left little record of their origins. No grand chronicles were etched into stone. No meticulously preserved histories were passed down through generations. What we know of them comes from fragmented mentions in later texts, stories whispered and embellished through countless tellings until they took on the ethereal quality of myth, a tapestry woven from truth and legend. By all accounts, they were an unremarkable people, easily overlooked in an age when empires rose and fell like tides across the vast continent of Essos. The East, the ancient empire of Guise, a power forged in the fires of slavery and military might, had already conquered vast territories, building its formidable influence on the backs of its legions of slaves and the organizational genius of its ruthless ruling class. Giscari, with their eyes fixed on expansion and domination, would have looked upon these humble shepherds, if they bothered to look at all, with nothing but utter contempt. What threat could these goat herders possibly pose to an empire that had stood for centuries, its foundations cemented with blood and steel? But the shepherds possessed a secret, a hidden advantage that the Giscari, in their arrogance, could not even begin to imagine. Deep within the 14 flames, in the deepest volcanic chambers where the heat reached unimaginable intensity and toxic fumes could kill a man in seconds, something extraordinary lived. Perhaps they had always been there, these creatures of fire and scale, ancient beings whose origins were lost to the mists. Perhaps they were drawn to the volcanoes from some distant primordial place, heat, the darkness, and the isolated sanctity of the flames, the legends are frustratingly silent on the exact details of how the first shepherd discovered them. But discover them they did, dragons. Not as metaphor, not as artistic representation etched into tapestries,
My
but
blood
as
claimed
living,
the ancient
breathing
power.
reality. The sun, with scales harder than any armor yet forged by human hands, with fire in their bellies hot enough to melt stone into glowing glass. Imagine the sheer terror of that first encounter. Lone shepherd, perhaps seeking a lost animal or foolishly exploring where wisdom and instinct warned him not to tread. Descending into caverns lit by the eerie red glow
Hold
of
steady,
magma,
feel the bond.
the air shimmering with unbearable
Rise
heat,
with me!
thick with the stench of sulfur. There in a chamber
we are
carved by
transformed!
nature, or perhaps by the creatures themselves, dragons.
fire,
Not
light
one,
binds
but
this
many,
power.
ranging from newly hatched things no larger
skies
than
are
dogs,
ours.
their scales still soft and vulnerable, to ancient beasts whose very presence would have made the mountain itself seem small and insignificant. The rational response, the instinctual urge for self-preservation, would have been to flee, to run screaming back to the safety of the surface world, to bury the memory of what had been seen, to never speak of it again. But something extraordinary happened instead, whether through an act of inexplicable courage, driven by madness, or perhaps some inherent quality deeply ingrained within these particular people. The shepherds did not run. They stayed. They observed with wide-eyed wonder and growing understanding. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to comprehend the nature of these magnificent beasts. The taming of dragons was not a simple process. It could not have been merely a matter of whips and chains, though these brutal tools would later play a role in the intricate dance between man and dragon. Dragons are not horses to be broken or dogs to be trained through simple reward and punishment. They possess intelligence, a cunning that perhaps surpassed that of humans in certain ways, and they would not bend to mere force alone. The early Valyrians must have discovered this harsh truth through bitter experience, through countless failed attempts that surely cost lives, perhaps even entire settlements reduced to ash and bone by dragonfire. But they persisted, driven by a combination of ambition, desperation, and an undeniable fascination with these majestic creatures. And in that persistence, they made discoveries that would forever change the course of history. Magic entered the equation, a force as primal and untamed as the dragons themselves. The Valyrians learned, perhaps from contact with travelers from the distant and mysterious land of Ashai, where sorcery had ancient roots that stretched back to the dawn of time, or perhaps through their own dangerous experimentation, that dragons responded to blood and fire, not merely the physical fire of torches and hearths, but something deeper, something that resonated with the very essence of the fire that burned within the dragons themselves. They developed intricate rituals, spells whose specific nature has been lost to the relentless erosion of time, but whose effects were undeniable. Through these mysterious means, they forged bonds with the dragons, connections that transcended the simple relationship between master and beast, evolving into something far more profound, something almost spiritual. A dragon would choose its rider, accepting them in a way that seemed both intuitive and inexplicable. And once that bond was forged, it held for life, a pact written in blood and fire. The transformation this wrought upon the Valyrian people was not merely political or military, it was physical, a metamorphosis that altered their very being, whether through prolonged exposure to the dragons, through the magic they practiced, or through some complex combination of factors that even they might not have fully understood. The Valyrians began to change. Their eyes, once brown or black or green like those of any other people, shifted to shades of purple and violet, colors that seemed to echo the flickering flames they worked with, a reflection of the dragon fire that burned within their souls. Their hair lightened to silver and platinum white, giving them an ethereal, almost otherworldly appearance, setting them apart from any other culture in the known world. Were these changes gradual, slowly spreading across generations, a subtle evolution driven by proximity to the dragons? Or did they happen more rapidly to those who worked most closely with the great beasts and delved deepest into the forbidden arts of dragon magic? The ancient texts are silent on these crucial details, lost to the ravages of time and the fires of the Doom. But by the time the Valyrians emerged onto the wider stage of history, they were recognizable not just by their power, not just by the terrifying might of their dragons, but by their very appearance, a testament to the transformative power of their connection to these ancient creatures. With dragons at their command, the shepherds were shepherds no more. They began to build not mere villages or towns, but a city worthy of their newfound status, a monument to their ambition and their mastery of the forces of nature. The city of Valyria rose in the shadow of the 14 flames, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The Valyrians had discovered that their magic could be applied not just to living creatures, but to the very stone itself. They did not laboriously cut and chisel their buildings as other peoples did, but rather worked the stone as if it were clay, shaping it through fire and sorcery into forms that seemed impossible, defying the very laws of physics. Towers rose without any visible means of support, soaring to dizzying heights with an almost unsettling grace. Bridges spanned distances that should have required massive pillars, but instead floated effortlessly on nothing but air and magic, a testament to the Valyrians' mastery of arcane forces. The city was a breathtaking testament to the harmonious marriage of raw power and exquisite artistry, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The establishment of Valyria as a magnificent, awe-inspiring city marked the true beginning of what would eventually become the Valyrian Freehold, a sprawling empire built on the backs of dragons and the mastery of forbidden magic. The shepherds had become dragonlords, and the world would never be the same. They organized themselves not as a kingdom with a single absolute ruler, but as a freehold, a unique confederation where all who owned land had a voice in the governance of their society. This was, on its surface, a surprisingly democratic arrangement for an ancient civilization, a system that seemingly valued the voices of all its freeborn citizens. But as with many such systems, the reality on the ground proved far less egalitarian than the lofty ideals enshrined in theory. Power, like water, gravitated naturally toward those who possessed the most significant advantage, those who commanded the skies with their fearsome dragons. And among those dragonlords, certain families inevitably rose to prominence, distinguishing themselves through their vast wealth, their unparalleled skill with magic, or simply the sheer size and unbridled ferocity of the dragons they commanded. Approximately 40 families came to dominate Valyrian society, forming the great houses of dragonlords whose words carried immense weight and whose dragons made that word law. These were not kings in the traditional sense, not crowned monarchs who inherited their power, but they might as well have been, for their influence was absolute and their authority unquestioned. Among them were families whose names history has tragically forgotten, lost in the cataclysmic destruction that would eventually claim them all, their legacies erased from the annals of time. Among them, too, were the Targaryens, who would improbably survive when all others fell, their dragons soaring above the ashes of the Doom. Though at this early stage they were far from the most powerful or influential of the Dragonlord families, they were respectable, yes, possessed of an ancient and proud lineage and their own formidable dragons, but in the intricate and often treacherous game of Valyrian politics, they were at best players of middling importance, their influence limited and their ambitions carefully restrained. The transformation from humble shepherds to formidable dragonlords had taken centuries, perhaps even longer. It was not a sudden revolution, a dramatic overnight shift in power, but rather a slow and deliberate evolution, each generation building carefully upon the discoveries of the last, each adding to the growing body of knowledge about dragons, magic, and the intoxicating allure of power. By the time Valyria emerged as a dominant force that would reshape the very landscape of Essos, the simple origins as humble herders must have seemed like a distant and almost unbelievable dream, barely remembered and possibly embellished beyond recognition. But those humble origins mattered. They established a pattern that would define Valyria throughout its turbulent existence. The relentless pursuit of power through the mastery of forces that others feared to touch, the audacity to reach for the impossible. The shepherds had dared to enter the fiery depths of the 14 flames and claim what they found there, bending the will of dragons to their own purposes. Their descendants would dare far more, reaching ever deeper into the forbidden realms of magic and ambition, until they ultimately reached too far, grasped at powers they could not control, and inevitably fell. The Valyrian Freehold, once it had coalesced from a collection of ambitious dragonlord families into a coherent and formidable political entity, represented something genuinely new and unprecedented in the world. It was not an empire in the traditional sense, ruled by a central emperor whose word was absolute and whose hereditary succession determined the fate of nations. Instead, it operated as a complex confederation of equals, at least in theory, where all who held land freely, the lords freeholders, possessed the right to participate in governance, to have their voices heard in the great decisions that would shape their civilization's future. This, in essence, was the meaning of freehold, a society where the freeborn landholders collectively controlled their own destiny, a system that theoretically promoted freedom and individual expression. But theory and practice, as they so often do, diverge sharply, creating a gap between the ideal and the harsh realities of power. While technically any landholder could participate in governance, the cold, hard truth was that those who commanded dragons held the true power, their influence dwarfing that of any mere landowner. The Dragonlords, those families who had mastered the ancient and perilous art of dragon riding and who maintained their own flights of the magnificent beasts, formed an effective ruling class, their decisions shaping the destiny of the freehold. They were the ones who mattered when important decisions needed to be made, when wars needed to be waged, when the overall direction of the freehold required setting. The other landholders could certainly speak, yes, but who would truly listen to a voice unaccompanied by the deafening roar of dragons? Among the Dragonlords themselves, a complex and often ruthless hierarchy existed, based on a myriad of factors, including the number and size of their dragons, the antiquity and purity of their lineage, and their mastery of the arcane sorcerous arts that were integral to Valyrian power. At times when circumstances demanded unified leadership, when the freehold faced existential threats or opportunities that required swift and coordinated action, the lords freeholders would elect archons to serve as temporary supreme leaders, granting them absolute authority for a limited duration. These were not permanent positions, not dynasties that could become entrenched and corrupt, but rather emergency measures deployed only when absolutely necessary. When the freehold faced imminent danger or required decisive action on the global stage, the archons would serve their purpose, guiding the civilization through turbulent times, and then gracefully step down, returning power to the collective of dragonlords, ensuring that no single individual could accumulate too much unchecked authority. Was a remarkably complex system that somehow managed to balance the competing ambitions of dozens of powerful and influential families while still allowing the freehold to act decisively and effectively when needed, a testament to the Valyrians' political ingenuity. The very heart of Valyrian power, beyond even the awe-inspiring might of the dragons themselves, lay in their unprecedented mastery of magic, an arcane art that they had elevated to a science. The Valyrians were not merely talented sorcerers. They had transformed magic into a systematic field of study, a rigorous discipline that permeated every aspect of their civilization, from the construction of their magnificent cities to the forging of their legendary steel. All Valyrian magic, according to the meticulous research of Archmaster Marwyn, who dedicated his life to studying these forbidden matters centuries after Valyria's fall, was fundamentally rooted in blood or fire. These were not mere poetic metaphors, but rather literal truths about the very essence and nature of their sorcery, the raw ingredients required to fuel their most potent spells. Blood magic, the darkest and most potent form of magical practice, required the sacrifice of living things to fuel its workings, the power of lifeblood channeling arcane energies. The greater the sacrifice, the more powerful the magic that could be achieved, a disturbing equation that led to unspeakable atrocities. Fire magic, on the other hand, drew upon the primal force of flame, particularly the unique and intensely powerful fires that burned within the dragons and in the volcanic depths of the 14 Flames, channeling the earth's raw energy. The blood mages of Valyria, known as blood mages or MGI, practiced arts that would have been condemned as unspeakable abominations in almost every other culture, their experiments pushing the very boundaries of what was considered natural and what was irrevocably perverse. The infamous flesh pits of Gogossos, a Valyrian colony located on the Isle of Tears in the far south, blood mages engaged in acts of such grotesque cruelty and depravity that even the limited historical records that survive speak of them with a palpable sense of horror and revulsion. They would forcibly mate slave women with various beasts, using their dark magic to ensure that pregnancy resulted from these unholy unions, twisting the laws of nature to their own twisted desires. The offspring of these unnatural couplings, twisted, half-human creatures called chimeras, served various purposes in Valyrian society, their existence a testament to the Valyrians' hubris and disregard for the sanctity of life. Some were kept as grotesque curiosities, displayed in private menageries as symbols of their creator's power and depravity. Others were used as slaves for particularly dangerous or demeaning tasks, their unnatural strength and resilience making them ideal for the most brutal forms of labor. Still others were subjected to further magical experimentation, their bodies serving as living canvases for the blood mage's macabre art. These horrific practices extended beyond the mere creation of chimeras. Some scholars, including the renowned Septon Barth, a figure of immense wisdom and unwavering moral conviction, speculated that the Valyrians had used their blood magic to create the dragons themselves, perhaps breeding them from wyverns and other lesser reptiles through sorcerous manipulation over countless generations, a dark and twisted act of creation. Whether this was true, whether dragons had always existed and the Valyrians had merely learned to tame them, remains a matter of intense debate among scholars and historians. What is certain, however, is that the complex relationship between Valyrians and their dragons involved magic at a fundamental level, a bond forged in the crucible of ancient rituals and arcane power. The bond between rider and dragon was not merely a matter of training, a simple act of domination, but something far deeper, forged through ancient rituals that likely involved blood sacrifice and possibly even death, a testament to the perilous nature of dragon riding. Perhaps the most visible and enduring legacy of Valyrian magical prowess was their legendary steel. Valyrian steel became the stuff of legends, its reputation growing with each passing century, and remained so centuries after the Freehold's cataclysmic destruction, and for good reason. Blades forged from this extraordinary material possess qualities that seem to defy the very laws of nature, their properties almost otherworldly. They were lighter than any castle-forged steel, yet demonstrably harder and stronger, able to withstand impacts that would shatter lesser metals. They could hold an edge that never dulled, remaining as sharp as the day they were forged even after centuries of constant use, a testament to the skill and artistry of the Valyrian smiths. The metal itself was strikingly distinctive, featuring rippled patterns that flowed across the surface like water frozen in motion, darker than normal steel, often appearing almost black in certain lights, lending it an air of both mystery and menace. The creation of Valyrian steel involved a meticulous combination of both mundane and magical techniques, a delicate balance between craftsmanship and arcane power. The steel was folded thousands upon thousands of times, a painstaking process that removed impurities and created the distinctive patterns visible in the finished blades, enhancing both its strength and its aesthetic appeal. But folding alone could not account for the steel's seemingly supernatural properties, the qualities that made it so highly prized and so utterly unique. Spells were undoubtedly involved. Ancient incantations passed down through generations of mastersmiths, secrets guarded with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. These rituals likely required blood sacrifice to power them, channeling the life force of the victim into the metal itself, imbuing it with magical properties. Dragonfire undoubtedly played a crucial role as well, providing the intense and concentrated heat necessary to work the metal in ways that normal forges simply could not achieve, allowing the smiths to manipulate the steel at a molecular level. Specific details of the process were closely guarded secrets, even within Valyria itself, known only to the select few mastersmiths who devoted their entire lives to the demanding and dangerous craft. When Valyria fell and the doom claimed the lives of everyone who possessed this knowledge, the secret of creating new Valyrian steel died with them, lost forever to the annals of time. Only one place in all the world retained even a partial understanding of the ancient art: the free city of Qohor. The smiths of Qohor possessed the ability to rework existing Valyrian steel, melting down old swords to create new ones or repairing damaged blades, preserving the legacy of the lost empire. But even they, with all their skill and expertise, could not create entirely new Valyrian steel from raw materials, their knowledge limited and incomplete. Meister Paul, driven by an insatiable desire to uncover the secrets of Qohoric smithcraft, spent years studying their methods, risking his life in the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. He was publicly whipped 3 times for asking too many intrusive questions, and was finally expelled from the city with his hand cruelly cut off as a warning to others, a testament to the Qohoric's fanatical protection of their secrets. According to his later writings, penned with a trembling hand, the Qohoric smiths used blood sacrifice in their desperate attempts to replicate true Valyrian steel, including the abhorrent sacrifice of infant slaves, a practice that shocked even the most hardened scholars. Whether this was the actual Valyrian method or merely the Cohoric's best, albeit ethically reprehensible approximation remains a matter of speculation. The creation of Valyrian steel represented just one application of the Valyrians' vast magical knowledge, a single facet of their mastery of the arcane arts. They possessed glass candles, objects made from obsidian that burned with a strange, otherworldly light, serving as powerful tools for communication, divination, and various other magical purposes. With these enigmatic candles, a skilled sorcerer could see across vast distances, across mountains and oceans, could peer into the dreams of men hundreds of miles away, could even speak mind to mind with others who possess similar candles, transcending the limitations of physical distance. The glass candles went dark after the Doom, their flames extinguished when Valyria fell, a phenomenon that added to the growing evidence that somehow the city itself had been the source or focal point of the magic that permeated the Freehold, a nexus of arcane power that amplified the abilities of its inhabitants. The capital city of Valyria reflected this unparalleled magical mastery in every aspect of its construction, from its towering architecture to its intricate infrastructure. According to King Viserys Targaryen, who became obsessed with Valyrian history in his later years and spent countless hours meticulously building a scale model of the city based on surviving historical records, Old Valyria was built partially inside an active volcano, its very foundations intertwined with the Earth's molten core. The highest nobles, the most powerful dragonlords, lived in magnificent structures carved directly into or built against the volcanic face itself, protected by intricate magical wards that allowed them to live in comfort mere yards from flowing molten rock, a testament to their power and their mastery of the elements. At the very heart of the city stood a formidable building known as the Anogorian, a place shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, where the blood mages practiced their dark arts, delving into the forbidden secrets of life and death. What exact the top these they were sphinx these roads and these they were the government there were these fam it was the different the target they were in their land they were this the culture they valued freedom and self-expression for themselves while simultaneously keeping countless others in chains, subjugating entire populations to their will. They created breathtaking beauty in their architecture and art while simultaneously committing atrocities in their pursuit of power, pushing the boundaries of knowledge while steadfastly refusing to acknowledge or respect any moral boundaries. The Valyrians practiced customs that other cultures found deeply shocking or utterly disgusting, a testament to their isolation and their belief in their own superiority. They permitted polygamy, with dragonlords often taking multiple wives to increase their chances of producing dragon riders and strengthening their family's bloodline. Even more controversially, they practiced incest, frequently marrying brother to sister or other close relatives, a practice that was considered abhorrent by most other civilizations. This practice stemmed partly from their unwavering belief that their blood, the blood that allowed them to bond with dragons, needed to be kept as pure and undiluted as possible, uncontaminated by outside influences. To dilute their blood through marriage to lesser folk would be to risk losing the unique abilities that set them apart from the rest of the world, jeopardizing their connection to their dragons and their place at the pinnacle of power. The discovery and taming of dragons had undoubtedly transformed the Valyrians from obscure shepherds into a people with the unprecedented capacity to reshape the very world around them. But capacity, as the saying goes, is not destiny. The path from local power to continental empire required something more than just dragons. It demanded the unwavering will to use that power and the brutal wars to prove it, to assert their dominance and establish their place as the undisputed rulers of Essos. The first great test of Valyrian might came from the east, from an empire that had stood for thousands of years, a civilization steeped in tradition and military might that saw itself as the rightful ruler of all civilized lands. This was the old empire of Guise, and the clash between Guise and Valyria would ultimately determine the fate of Essos for millennia to come, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the continent. Old Guise was ancient when Valyria was young, a civilization with a history that stretched back to the dawn of time. Built upon the brutal foundations of slavery and unwavering military discipline, the Giscari had relentlessly conquered vast territories, establishing an empire that stretched across much of eastern Essos, Their influence felt from the shimmering shores of the Jade Sea to the rugged peaks of the Mountains of the Morn. Their capital, Old Guise, was protected by massive brick walls that legend attributed to Grozdan the Great, the semi-mythical founder of their civilization, a figure revered as both a warrior and a god. These walls, constructed with meticulous care and immense labor, had never fallen, had stood against countless sieges and assaults for centuries, their imposing presence serving as powerful symbols of Giscari permanence and unwavering power. The Giscari military prowess was legendary, with slave legions drilled to absolute obedience and tactical perfection. Their soldiers renowned for their unwavering discipline and their ability to execute complex maneuvers on the battlefield. The Giscari looked out across their vast domains and saw no equals, only subjects and those who would soon become subjects, their arrogance fueled by centuries of unbroken military success. When the Valyrians began expanding beyond their volcanic peninsula, establishing colonies and asserting control over vital trade routes, the Giscari viewed this with the same disdain that old established powers often reserve for upstart newcomers, dismissing them as insignificant irritants that would soon be crushed beneath their heel. Who were these upstart shepherds, these dragon-riding barbarians, to challenge the established order that Guise had painstakingly built over millennia? The Giscari, confident in their superior strength, sent their legions to put the Valyrians in their place, to remind them that the world already had masters and that they were most certainly not among them, their intentions clear and their resolve unwavering. Thus began the first of the Giscari Wars, a series of bloody and protracted conflicts that would be waged over centuries and would ultimately doom one of the two great powers, shattering the balance of power in Essos and paving the way for a new era of conflict and chaos. The Giscari had every reason to be confident, their chances of victory seemingly assured. They had superior numbers, a highly organized military structure, centuries of unbroken military tradition, and control of strategic positions throughout the region. What they did not have, what they could not conceive of as a decisive factor in the coming conflict, were dragons, the ultimate weapon that would turn the tide of war and reshape the destiny of Essos. The First War must have been a revelation and a nightmare for the Giscari, a brutal awakening to the new reality of warfare in a world where dragons ruled the skies. Giscari legions, composed of some of the finest infantry in the known world, marched in perfect formation against the Valyrian positions, their discipline and training unmatched by any other army. And then, with a deafening roar that shook the very earth, the dragons came, their fiery breath turning the battlefield into an inferno, not from the front lines, where legions clashed in brutal melee, nor from the flanks, where swift cavalry might exploit a weakness, but from the very heavens themselves did the Valyrian terror descend. Imagine, if you can, the sheer unadulterated horror of that first encounter from the Giscari perspective. The sky, once a familiar expanse of blue, suddenly choked with leathery wings, blotting out the sun and casting the battlefield into an unnatural twilight. The roar of the dragons, a sound unlike anything they had ever known, a primal scream of fire and fury, utterly drowned out the shouted commands of their officers, rendering their carefully drilled formations useless. And then came the fire. Dragon fire, an element unlike any natural flame, burned with an unholy intensity, hotter than the heart of a volcano, capable of turning stone into molten slag. Imagine the agony, the instantaneous incineration of men clad in plate armor, reduced to mere ash in the blink of an eye. The legendary discipline of the Giscari legions, forged in countless battles and the bedrock of their empire, fractured and crumbled. How could it not? They were being asked, nay, commanded, to stand firm while literally burning alive, while their comrades became screaming, writhing torches beside them, while the very air around them became too searing to breathe. The Valyrians secured their initial victory not through superior tactics, nor through any inherent courage that the Giscari lacked, but through the sheer overwhelming application of force from an angle the Giscari had no possible means to counter. Was an aerial assault centuries ahead of its time, a strategic masterstroke born of winged nightmares. But the Giscari were not a people to accept defeat with meekness. Their empire had been built upon the cornerstones of relentless persistence and cunning adaptation. They applied these same qualities to the daunting problem of dragons. The Second War saw the emergence of new and desperate strategies. Massed formations, shields interlocked, designed to offer some semblance of resistance against the fiery deluge from above. Colossal magical like each time in the third in the fourth the Valyr they would in the great but the coloss when they so and the survive in a the defeat over the generations that followed. These slaves and their descendants slowly forgot their own language, their own history, their own customs, forgetting everything except the faint haunting memory that they had once been something greater, that they had once ruled an empire and had fallen from grace. They learned to speak High Valyrian, the tongue of their conquerors, because knowing no other language was possible within the confines of their servitude. 3 cities survived from the old empire: Astapor, Meereen, and Yunkai, all strategically located on the shores of Slaver's Bay. These cities were allowed to continue existing not out of any Valyrian mercy, but because they served a specific and crucial purpose. They would serve as the primary slave markets for the region, providing the endless stream of human labor that the voracious Valyrian economy demanded. The Giscari heritage in these cities survived only in fragments, in certain architectural styles reminiscent of their former glory, in a few fading traditions, and most ironically of all, in the very practice of slavery itself. But the great civilization that had ruled for millennia, that had once rivaled the might of Valyria itself, was gone, utterly destroyed so thoroughly that it would never rise again. The flames of Gi were extinguished forever. The Giscari Wars established several patterns that would come to define the Valyrian Freehold throughout its long and tumultuous existence. First, they demonstrated beyond any doubt that the Valyrians were willing to use overwhelming force to achieve their objectives, showing no mercy whatsoever to enemies who refused to submit to their will. Second, they irrevocably proved that dragons were the ultimate military asset, capable of winning wars that conventional forces could not, serving as both shock troops and engines of absolute destruction. Third, and perhaps most ominously, they revealed that the Valyrians were willing to commit genocide to secure their position, to erase entire civilizations from the pages of history if they deemed it necessary. The destruction of Old Guise was not merely a military victory, it was a conscious, calculated decision to obliterate an entire culture, to rewrite history in their own image. Having conquered the East, the Valyrians turned their gaze westward, their ambitions stretching towards new horizons. For a time, they coexisted peacefully with the Rhoynar civilization that flourished along the banks of the Rhoyne, one of the mightiest rivers in the known world. The Rhoynar were an advanced and sophisticated culture in their own right, possessing powerful water magic and boasting cities of unparalleled beauty and ingenuity. The Valyrians established trading posts along the river, initially small settlements that posed no immediate threat to Rhoynar independence. Both civilizations benefited from this arrangement, with Valyrian goods flowing through Rhoynar markets and Rhoynar culture subtly influencing the Valyrian colonies. But what began as peaceful trade gradually evolved into something far more ambitious, far more dangerous. The Valyrian outposts grew into towns, then into bustling cities, their influence expanding along the Rhoyne like creeping vines. The Valyrians, particularly those of the burgeoning colony of Volantis, began to cast covetous eyes upon the fertile Rhoynar territories, their ambitions fueled by greed and the insatiable desire for expansion. As conflicts over trade rights and territorial boundaries escalated, small skirmishes gave way to larger battles, and larger battles inevitably exploded into full-scale war. Rhoynar Wars, as they came to be called, would last for generations, a brutal and protracted struggle that would ultimately culminate in the effective destruction of Rhoynar civilization and elicit the greatest military response Valyria had ever mounted. The Rhoynar princes initially fought separately, each fiercely defending his own city-state against the encroaching Valyrian threat. Princess Nymeria of Nisar argued passionately for a united response, warning her fellow rulers that divided they would inevitably fall to the Dragonlords one by one. But her counsel went unheeded, her warnings dismissed as the fear-mongering of a woman. The princes, blinded by pride and complacency, believed that their water magic and their formidable military prowess would be sufficient to handle the upstart Valyrian colonies. They won some early victories, proving that they were not easy prey, that the Rhoynar were a force to be reckoned with. But then the Valyrian Freehold itself took notice, turning its full attention to the rebellious Rhoynar. Prince Garin of Croyan emerged as the great Rhoynar hero, the charismatic leader who finally managed to unite the fractured city-states into a single, cohesive military force. He assembled an army of 250,000 men, an absolutely massive force by any contemporary standard, a testament to his leadership and the Rhoynar's determination to resist Valyrian domination. This formidable army marched to meet the Valyrians in battle, achieving victory after victory against seemingly insurmountable odds. At Celeris, they decisively defeated a Valyrian army, sending the survivors fleeing in disarray. At Volantis, they achieved their greatest and most celebrated triumph, routing an army of 100,000 men, and most impressively of all, killing 2 dragons in the process and grievously wounding a third. It seemed for a brief and shining moment that the Rhoynar might actually win, that Prince Garin had finally found the means to overcome the seemingly invincible Dragonlords. The hope of liberation flickered like a candle in the darkness. The Valyrian response was swift, brutal, and utterly overwhelming. They could not allow even the slightest possibility that they might be defeated, that their invincibility could be challenged. They could not permit other subject peoples to witness that the Dragonlords could be beaten, lest rebellion spread like wildfire throughout their vast empire. The Freehold mobilized not the paltry 3 dragons that had fought at Volontheris, but 300. Some accounts even claim that the number was higher, perhaps closer to 400 or even 500. The sky was so filled with dragons that the sun itself was obscured, plunging the land into an unnatural twilight. This was the full might of Valyria unleashed, and nothing, it seemed, could stand against it. The final battle was not a battle at all, but a slaughter. Prince Garin's valiant army, which had fought so bravely and won such stunning victories, was utterly annihilated, consumed by dragonfire. 300 dragons attacking in concert created an inferno of unimaginable proportions, turning the rivers themselves to steam, scalding the very earth. The heat was so intense that men died before the flames even touched them, their lungs seared by simply breathing the superheated air. Prince Garin himself was captured, broken, and forced to watch in helpless agony as his army burned and his people died, their screams echoing across the ravaged landscape. The Valyrians, in a final act of humiliation, caged him like a wild animal and displayed him in chains throughout the conquered territories, a grim warning to all who might dare to resist their power. According to Princess the Survivor, they sailed for years, wandering the seas, seeking a place where they might rebuild their lives far from the reach of Valyrian power. Eventually, the Rhoyne, the river, and from the drag, the century, but peak at its the emp, and it the free Volant. These cities were thoroughly Valyrian in culture and governance, though they developed their own local characteristics and customs over time. The ruling classes spoke High Valyrian and often included actual Dragonlord families or their lesser relatives, ensuring loyalty to the Freehold. The cities were connected to the capital and to each other through the famous dragon roads, those straight and perfectly constructed highways that allowed for the rapid movement of troops and trade, facilitating the flow of resources and maintaining Valyrian dominance. Qohor and Norvos, founded in regions farther from the capital, served different and more specialized purposes. Qohor, nestled deep within the forest, became renowned for its timber and later for its skilled smiths, who purportedly learned some closely guarded secrets of metalwork from Valyrian masters. Norvos, situated in the hills to the north, provided valuable metals and served as a buffer against the wild and untamed lands beyond the reach of Valyrian civilization. Each colony enriched the Freehold, sending tribute and resources back to the capital while benefiting from the protection and prestige that came with being part of the greatest civilization of the age. Even Braavos, that most independent-minded of the free cities, began as a Valyrian creation, though not an intentional one. Braavos was founded by escaped slaves who stole ships and fled into the foggy islands north of the Valyrian colonies, seeking freedom from their bondage. They hid their city for over a century before revealing its existence to the wider world, fearful of Valyrian retribution. The fact that they needed to remain hidden for so long speaks volumes about the thoroughness of Valyrian control. One did not simply escape the Freehold and establish a new life elsewhere. The dragons would find you, and the punishment would be swift and severe. The island of Dragonstone represented the westernmost extent of Valyrian expansion, a formidable fortress colony established on a massive rock in the Narrow Sea roughly 200 years before the Doom. Dragonstone was strange even by Valyrian standards, a place of brooding power and ancient secrets. carved from the black volcanic stone of the island into forms that resembled dragons in every chamber and tower. It served as a strategically important monitoring station, allowing the Freehold to keep a watchful eye on the lands of Westeros across the water, ensuring that no potential threats could arise unnoticed. But the Valyrians never attempted to fully conquer the seven kingdoms of Westeros, and scholars have debated the reasons for this strategic restraint ever since. Westeros certainly possessed valuable resources, including timber, iron, and fertile farmland, all things that an expanding empire could readily utilize, but it was also distant, relatively poor by Valyrian standards, and conquering it would have required a significant investment of resources for what was likely to be an uncertain return. The most plausible explanation is that the Dragonlords simply never viewed Westeros as being worth the effort. They had more pressing concerns closer to home, more valuable territories to exploit, and more worthy enemies to crush. Westeros was a backwater, and backwaters could wait. Daily life within the city of Valyria itself would have been unlike anything else in the known world. A sensory overload of sights, sounds, and smells that would both fascinate and terrify. The capital was home to perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, though exact population figures were never accurately recorded or simply did not survive the doom lost to the mists of time. The city was rigidly divided into distinct districts based on social status and function, reflecting the strict social hierarchy that permeated Valyrian society. Highest nobility, those Dragonlord families with the most power and prestige, resided in the grandest structures, built closest to the volcanic heart of the 14 Flames themselves. These were not the buildings did not merely house people, they made powerful statements about the might and sophistication of the Valyrian Freehold. The top bridges, Sphinx at the very it was the Eno, the city, the fort, the smith, a master, the fort, markets, silks, slave, spice, the mark, the slave. They served, but the no, they engaged. It was a life of unparalleled luxury and power, built upon the foundations of slavery and magic, beautiful and seductive to those who benefited from it, but utterly horrific for those who did not. The wealth flowing into Valyria was staggering, an unprecedented accumulation of riches that surpassed the wildest dreams of kings and emperors. Every colony paid tribute, sending a steady stream of resources back to the capital. Every conquered people sent a portion of their production, their labor enriching their conquerors. The mines beneath the 14 Flames operated constantly, their tireless slave labor producing gold and silver in quantities that would have made Valyria the richest civilization in the world. Even without their other advantages, this sheer wealth funded further expansion, allowing them to breed more dragons, develop more potent magic, and acquire more of everything that made them so powerful. It created a self-perpetuating cycle where power generated wealth, which in turn generated more power, seemingly without end, a golden age of unparalleled prosperity. But this golden age, this period when Valyria seemed invincible and eternal, contained within it the seeds of its own destruction, a fatal flaw hidden beneath its glittering veneer. The very practices that had made them powerful, their reckless use of blood magic, their constant mining that destabilized the volcanic systems beneath their city, and their absolute certainty that their power could overcome any conceivable threat, were all silently preparing the ground for a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. Their hubris and arrogance, the Valyrians could not fathom that their civilization might ever end, that their dominion could ever be challenged. They were the masters of dragons, the greatest sorcerers the world had ever known, and the unchallenged rulers of half the known world. How could such a civilization possibly fall? To truly understand the Valyrian Freehold, one must confront the darkness that lurked at its core, the moral compromises that underpinned its power and prosperity. This was not a civilization of benign philosophers who stumbled upon power and used it wisely. It was a ruthless and pragmatic society that deliberately embraced practices that other cultures would consider abominations, pursuing knowledge and power regardless of the ethical or moral costs. Their magic, their very civilization, was built upon the foundations of blood and suffering, making many of their accomplishments morally compromised at best and utterly monstrous at worst. All Valyrian sorcery, as noted by Archmaester Marwyn centuries after the Doom, was rooted in blood or fire, a stark and unsettling truth about the origins of their power. This was not merely a metaphor, but a literal description of how their magic functioned. Blood magic, the most powerful and most dangerous form of sorcery known to the world, required the sacrifice of living beings to fuel its workings, to unlock its potent energies. The more significant the sacrifice, the greater the power that could be achieved, and the more devastating the effects. A small and relatively minor spell might require only the blood of an animal, a simple ritualistic offering. Greater workings, however, would demand human sacrifice, the ultimate demonstration of power and the most potent source of magical energy. The most powerful spells, those that could alter fundamental reality or create lasting changes to the world, required massive sacrifices, performed with exacting ritual precision to unleash their full potential. The blood mages of Valyria were the undisputed masters of this dark and forbidden art, their knowledge passed down through generations in secret grimoires and whispered incantations. They could glimpse into the future, though their visions were often imperfect and shrouded in ambiguity, their interpretations fraught with peril. They could curse enemies, sending misfortune, disease, or madness across vast distances, their vengeful magic capable of reaching the farthest corners of the Freehold. They could create magical objects imbued with power that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, imbuing artifacts with potent spells that would endure for centuries. And most terrifying of all, they could manipulate flesh itself, twisting living creatures into new and grotesque forms that served Valyrian purposes, blurring the lines between man and beast and defying the natural order. These blood mages were not merely talented individuals. They were a distinct and highly organized class of sorcerers who had systematized blood magic, transforming it from scattered practices into a disciplined field of study, a dark science with its own set of principles and protocols. They were the guardians of Valyrian's most potent secrets, the architects of its magical supremacy. The blood mages were not necessarily identical with the Dragonlords, though there was certainly significant overlap between the two groups. Some Dragonlords possessed significant magical ability and could perform blood magic themselves, wielding both dragonfire and arcane power. Others employed skilled blood mages to handle the more esoteric aspects of dragon riding and other magical tasks, relying on their expertise to enhance their own abilities. Not all blood mages were of the highest nobility. Some came from lesser families, their magical talent elevating them to positions of influence and authority that they could never have achieved through birth alone. This created an interesting dynamic within Valyrian society, where magical ability could partially offset the rigid social hierarchies that otherwise defined their civilization, allowing individuals from humble backgrounds to rise to positions of power and influence. The flesh pits of Gossos represent perhaps the most disturbing and morally reprehensible application of Valyrian blood magic, a testament to the depravity that festered beneath the surface of their seemingly glorious civilization. Gossos was a Valyrian colony located on the Isle of Tears, far to the south in the Summer Sea, a place of tropical beauty that masked unspeakable horrors. It became the site of experiments that pushed the boundaries of what civilized people could even contemplate, a realm where the laws of nature and the boundaries of morality were routinely violated. The blood mages in Gossos forced slave women to mate with beasts, using their magic to ensure that pregnancy resulted and that the offspring survived, defying the natural barriers between species. The creatures born from these unnatural unions, the chimeras, were twisted and grotesque abominations that combined human and animal features in ways that should not have been possible, mockeries of life and testaments to the depravity of Valyrian science. What purpose did these chimeras serve? The surviving texts do not provide complete answers, leaving many questions unanswered. However, we can make educated guesses based on the fragments that remain, more likely kept as mere curiosities, grotesque living tapestries showcasing the Valyrians' mastery over life and death, a testament to their magical and scientific, or rather pseudoscientific, prowess. Imagine them displayed in opulent menageries, conversation starters at decadent banquets, their existence a constant reminder of Valyria's unparalleled power. Others may have been bred for very specific utilitarian purposes, a combination of human intellect with the raw strength of a bear, perhaps, or the keen senses of a hawk. Imagine legions of beastmen bred for war, their loyalty absolute, their capabilities exceeding those of ordinary soldiers. Or perhaps they were created as laborers, possessing the intelligence to follow complex instructions but the tireless stamina of a work animal. Still others were probably destined for the cold stone tables of the blood mages, raw materials for their dark experiments. They were living puzzles to be dissected and reassembled, subjected to agonizing procedures in the endless pursuit of magical understanding. The blood mages sought to push the very boundaries of flesh, to discover the breaking point, the limit of what a living being could endure and still impossibly be. This practice in itself betrays a profound and disturbing lack of empathy, a casual disregard for the sanctity of life. Living creatures were viewed as nothing more than components, clay to be molded, tools to be used and discarded. Beyond the chimeras, the stitched-together abominations, there's compelling evidence suggesting the Valyrians engaged in even more ambitious projects, the creation and manipulation of entirely new life forms. Septon Barth, a scholar whose name is synonymous with Valyrian lore, dared to speculate in his controversial, oft-debated treatise, Dragons, Worms, and Wyverns, Their Unnatural History, that the blood mages might have even used wyvern stock as the raw genetic material, the base ingredient for the creation of dragons themselves. This is, of course, a deeply contentious suggestion. Many believe dragons existed naturally, primordial beings of immense power who predated the Valyrians by millennia. The Valyrians, these scholars argue, merely discovered them, learned to tame them, and weaponized their awe-inspiring power. But the unsettling possibility that dragons themselves are products of Valyrian blood magic, meticulously crafted biological weapons, simply cannot be dismissed out of hand. The creatures are almost too perfect for their intended purpose, too ideally suited to serve as instruments of war, symbols of dominance, and tools of intimidation. Did the Valyrians stumble upon dragons, or did they create them? The truth, like so much Valyrian lore, vanished in the cataclysm of the Doom, lost to the ages. The spells required to bind dragons to riders, to forge that unbreakable connection, almost certainly involved blood magic. Dark rituals performed in the heart of active volcanoes. The bond between dragon and rider was far more than mere training, more than the simple affection that might develop between a master and a pet. Though a shared history, beginning from a young age, undoubtedly played a crucial role, something far deeper transpired during the bonding process. A melding of minds, a merging of souls that irrevocably linked the dragon's consciousness to that of its rider in a way that persisted until death claimed one or both. This profound connection likely required ritual sacrifice, perhaps even human sacrifice, to ignite the magical spark and fuel the nascent bond. The dragon had to be offered something significant, something precious to ensure its eternal loyalty. The willingness of dragons to accept riders only from specific bloodlines, those of Valyrian descent, suggests that something inherently hereditary was at play, a particular quality in the blood, a specific sequence of genes that made the bonding process possible, that resonated with the dragon's very being. The creation of Valyrian steel, the legendary metal that held an edge sharper than any other, was not simply a matter of skilled smithcraft. It also involved intricate magical spells, enchantments that drew upon the potent energies of blood magic. The forging process was a dark art, shrouded in secrecy and fueled by sacrifice. Centuries after the Doom, the master smiths of Qohor, desperate to rediscover the lost secrets of Valyrian steel, were observed by Meister Paul to be sacrificing infant slaves in their frantic attempts to replicate the true forging process. Whether this was the actual Valyrian method, passed down through generations of smiths, or merely the Qohoric smith's best guess, their desperate attempt to reverse-engineer a lost art remains a mystery. But the fact that human sacrifice was their chosen approach strongly suggests they believed blood was an integral, essential component. The steel was folded and worked with dragon fire, imbued with its heat and power. Yes, the intense heat was essential, but the spells that imbued the steel with its supernatural properties, its legendary sharpness and unbreakable strength, required fuel. And blood magic provided that fuel, imbuing the metal with a dark and terrible power. The glass candles represented another application of Valyrian sorcery, one that was less overtly violent, less stained with the blood of innocence, but no less imbued with potent magic. These objects, crafted from obsidian and worked through methods lost to time, burned with an eerie, unearthly light that never consumed them. A trained sorcerer wielding a glass candle could perform feats that seemed utterly impossible, seeing across vast distances, peering over mountains and across oceans, invading and manipulating the dreams of others, communicating instantaneously with someone on the opposite side of the world who possessed another lit candle. These were tools of unimaginable power, granting the Valyrians unparalleled advantages in intelligence gathering and tactical coordination, capabilities that no other civilization could even dream of matching. After the Doom, all the glass